Thank you very much. I really want to say that I personally am thrilled and honored as a child of Massachusetts to come to Boston on Constitution Day, which we're celebrating today. It's the 17th, but it was on a weekend, and we're celebrating it today. And for me, this is a thrill, truly is. I fancy myself a student of the Constitution and a student of history, irrespective of my background in politics, because there is a difference. Of the documents that we have, the two most important in my mind is the Declaration of Independence, where we literally said that all human beings are created equal. Now, that is the touchstone of human governance, that admission. And then, of course, 11 years later, we have the development of the Constitution, because our forebears realized that the system that they had constructed, which was a confederation of equally sovereign states, 13 sovereign states. And the tragedy at the time that a couple of them were at war with each other. People in Connecticut were attacking people in New York, the issues over Western lands, all of that essentially corrupted the ability of our country to continue with the charter that it had. And so our forebears recognized that they had to come up with a change. They had to come about, and what was that change to be? Now, we like to flatter ourselves to say that, well, this is because of Montesquieu, the Frenchman, and he did. He's the one that really developed the concept of the troika of three different parts checking on each other. And then, of course, we had John Locke and others. But we sort of forget that the federal system came from the Swiss in 1292 with the Bundesbrief. Now, we paid back to Swiss because they copied our Constitution. They added an ingredient that I'll speak more about later, and that was they brought the people into the operation of government in partnership with their elected officials, and as a result, we see Switzerland today, the only democracy in the world. All the rest, which have copied our Constitution, are essentially representative governments. And the Swiss, at the time, had just completed a 3-year civil war, religious civil war, I might say. And the Swiss, of course, have 4 languages, 4 cultures, have a terrain that's very, very difficult to make a living from. And today, they distinguish themselves as one of the most prosperous people in the world. And the only thing in the structure of their governance that distinguishes them from all other, quote, democracies is the fact that they brought the people in as partners with their elected officials. Going back to American history, I want to take this opportunity to go into some facet of the Constitution in detail, because it is a marvelous document. Make no mistake about it. When you look at the stages of human governance that we're in our society, this is the first written Constitution, and it laid out the procedures for a functioning government, and that's what we needed at the time, was a functioning government. But to look at the Constitution with fantasy is wrong. We must look at the Constitution and look at the reality of it, the reality of what brought it about, and the reality of what it is today. And that reality is very simple. Up until the middle of August in 1787 in Philadelphia, there was no chance to bring about a government. No chance. There was an agreement. But the minute, to put it clearly, the deal was cut for slavery, everything fell into place, and by the middle of September, on the 17th, they were able to come out with a document. I consider myself part of the George Mason School. I wished that we had had another effort at creating a constitution. From the history that I read, it was Mr. Pinckney from South Carolina who literally in mid-August took over the convention and brought in slavery, and then everything else was agreed to after that. Well, this is very serious because 11 years before, our forebears said that all human beings are created equal. That's not the document they fashioned in Philadelphia. They fashioned a good document, but far from perfect, because it took, and they locked in slavery so tight that it took a civil war to stop it. And that civil war, unfortunately, is, as this great leader from Massachusetts said, that the Civil War is the last battle of the Revolutionary War. And that was the last battle of the Revolutionary War, and that was John Quincy Adams. That was John Quincy Adams from Massachusetts. And if you look closely at American history, you'll see that the only two presidents, and they were both from Massachusetts, all other presidents up till the Civil War were slaveholders. In the Civil War, when the constitutional amendments took place, we were able to correct that problem. But keep in mind the constitutional history that evolved from thenceforward. And that was very simple, that we had Jim Crowism for another 90 years. And in the states that wantonly disobeyed and violated the Constitution were never taken to task into the into 1964. Let's look back a little bit at what the cost of that mistake in our Constitution. It was partially repaired by the Bill of Rights, which of course were not in the Constitution originally. Those Bill of Rights came about later because an agreement, and it was a verbal agreement made by Madison and others, that they would enact the Bill of Rights if this were ratified. Now, scholars will tell us that, well, they had no choice but to go to conventions. Well, let me tell you, they had a lot of choice. You could ride a horse from Georgia all the way to Maine. You could do it in 30 days. It took 9 months to ratify the Constitution under the process that they had. And that was that we were going to go to conventions. And who was at these conventions? It was the leaders of the states, the leaders who were in Philadelphia, and so it was the pros and cons on the ratification process. And so they duked it out, and we barely got ratification. But we did get ratification. And so what was placed in the Constitution that tied it down so tight? 5 elements of the Constitution are grossly undemocratic. 4 of them are still there. The first one was 3/8, that a Negro is 3/8 of a human being, a white person. And of course, if you do the math, you see that the Massachusetts John Adams, when he ran for re-election as president, had it not been for the Negro vote in the South, he would have been re-elected president and not Thomas Jefferson. It's interesting to look at which of course that 3/8 was corrected in the Civil War. But what are the other 4 that are still there that create all kinds of mischiefs in the United States? Well, there's obviously one is the Electoral College. Now, does it surprise you today that a person from Alaska or Wyoming or North Dakota, when he votes for president or she votes for president, has 5 times more impact than a person in New York, California, Massachusetts, or any other big cities? Well, and of course, you've heard it, I've heard it, oh, we need to change the Electoral College. Don't hold your breath. Because you see, and this brings us to the next area that's unconstitutional, Article 5, the amending process of the Constitution. Article 5 is very clearly that you need 2/3 or you need a convention you need 2/3 of the Congress, and then it must go to 3/4 of the states for ratification. Okay? Do the math. Alaska, the Senate chamber has 20 people. Less than 600 people can thwart any amendment to the Constitution, because all you need are 13 chambers. So if you had 13 Senate chambers from the smallest states, you can't amend the Constitution. Now that's the amending process in representative government. Never mind the people. Another area, and I was a senator. I was happy to be a senator. But, you know, the truth be told, I represented more moose than I represented people. And is it fair that I, as a senator from Alaska, and there was 2 of us, we only had 1 congressman. We didn't have enough people to have more than 1 congressman, but we had 2 senators. And is that fair to the people of Massachusetts, of California, of New York? Of course it's not fair. It's not very democratic. But we have that device in there, and that device, if you look very closely, historians will tell you it's the big state, small state issue that was being settled at the Constitution. A little more than that. It really locked in the fact that and the states were appointed by, at the time, members of their local legislatures. It was a way of locking in slavery. What's another one? We did the Electoral College, the Senate, and of course the Article 5, the amending process of the Constitution. And let me give you what is the most important one of all. And that was the acceptance of federalism at the Constitutional Convention. Because the issue for many people was states' rights. We've got to have our rights, and the issue was, are states superior to the federal government? Well, of course, every state constitution has a clause right up front in the Constitution that all power emanates from the people, and federal people are more significant because it's a larger group. So lo and behold, what happens? The deal was cut that all elections of federal officers would be done at the local level. At the time, it was just members of Congress, and it was the president. Now, stop and think. Remember the statement that Joseph Stalin once made, and that was that, oh, I don't care about the elections. It's who counts the votes and how and who controls the election that will determine who's going to be in power. And that's exactly what happened in our country. And so we saw this in Florida. We saw this where the Supreme Court, which overstepped its boundaries and decided who was going to be president. We saw this in Ohio. And yet, what did the Congress do? It passed $3 billion to go hire Diebold and other contractors to get these machines that would make it easier to mess up the electoral process. That's where we're at today. And that informs me that the Constitution, though a wonderful document, that our framers, and I distinguish between the framers and the forebears. The framers are the ones that did the document. Keep in mind, our forebears, starting, and George Washington was one of them, Thomas Jefferson, James Madison, James Wilson, what did they say repeatedly and repeatedly? The quotes ad nauseum, that the American people should be able to change their government in the future in order to satisfy their needs to secure happiness. Now, what does that say? That we, the people, should be able to change our government and improve it. But they did one mistake, and this was the big flaw at the convention. They didn't give us any procedures to change the Constitution. The government has procedures. Our leaders have procedures to change the Constitution, but we people, we don't have procedures. And so there's a job to be done. And that job is to turn around and complete the work of our founding fathers and our forebears. And what is that work? And that is to bring the people into the operation of government, as we see in Switzerland, as lawmakers. Understand, the central power of government is lawmaking. It's superior to the executive and the president. It's superior to the judiciary, because that's the contribution Solon in 592 BC gave to humanity. And that was, we create a law out there, and then we obey the law, and if we don't like the law, we should be able to change it. But right now, the only people that can change the law are our elected officials, because we take our sovereign power on election day for a very few seconds, and we give it to elected politicians. And politicians who raise money from special interest in order to manipulate the constituency to get themselves elected to office. And yet we know scientifically, guaranteed, that the constituency operating as a majority can provide better leadership, better quality of governance than, of course, any other form of government. Now, I have spent the last 25 years of my life, and will spend it the rest of my life, and that is to create and to complete the work of the Founding Fathers. And you all know what Abraham Lincoln said at the close of the Gettysburg Address: government of, by, and for the people. Well, he was right on two counts. We have never had government by the people. When you say government by the people, that means that people can go in and use the basic tool of governance, and that is making laws. And so we don't have that at the federal level. And fortunately, we copied the Swiss before the First World War, and we instituted initiative legislation. At the time, it was IRR. But you don't need referendum. That's when the government refers things to you, and all you have is an up and down vote. And you don't need to worry about impeachment or recall, because if you can make a law by initiative, you can do both of the others, and then some. And so now, what I focused my attention on was to bring about legislation, and it's called the National Initiative for Democracy. You can go to that website, ni4d.us, and you can see this piece of legislation, which is made up of a constitutional amendment, which asserts the people's sovereign right to make laws. And obviously, it uses Article 7 of the Constitution, which is the article that brought about when 9 states ratify this Constitution. It becomes the law of those 9 states, and that immediately violated the Constitution, the Confederation Constitution. And so that's the precedent that we do. Now, I'm under no delusions, having served in government, having been involved in politics ever since I was 15 years old. I'm under no delusions that representative government will give 1 ounce of power to the people. It just will not happen. And so we have to figure out a way to circumvent the people. And that's what we've done with the National Initiative. This initiative goes right to the people. Here, if we had to go to a convention system where we turn around and then have to go to the states to get it ratified, nothing's going to happen. But what you can do with today's technology, you can ask the people, do you want to be empowered to really control your government, to set policy, not to do away with representative government? We have learned too much over the 230 years. We keep all of that, and we turn around and bring the people in as lawmakers operating independent of representative government. Now, what really happens is when the people come in, they become the senior partners in this governance of the American people. That's what I've been working on. And so it was little wonder for me to go ahead and figure out what we needed to do with respect to 9/11. Now, Mr. McCampbell brought up the subject. I want to really conclude on that. Our democracy is in deep difficulty. We all know that, and we all have various approaches to how we're going to solve it. Well, the only way I know how to solve it is to go to the people. And what's the only avenue? Because if this legislation that I've written, the National Initiative for Democracy, were in place, we could do this in 30 days at the federal level. But we don't have the people operating at the federal level. We have it operating in 24 states, Massachusetts being one of them. In every one of these 24 states, it's bad law. One example is we have to collect over 68,000 signatures in Massachusetts, and we got 2 months to do it, and it'll cost over $250,000. That's not democracy, not the kind of democracy that I know of and aspire to. So what happened at 9/11? That's the $64 question. What happened? Well, we think we know. But then the people who investigated it themselves have admitted we were set up to fail. Several of the commissioners said, this is a national scandal. This is wrong. This is a fraud. Now, if the commissioners who were part of the process don't believe in what they did, why should the American people continue to believe what the government has said? And then you have NIST. I won't go into the technical. I don't consider myself a scientist at all. But we've had in the last 10 years scientists all over the world examining the events of 9/11. And they question the scientific basis of what the government's been telling the American people. How can we change that? Because mainstream media is locked in with corporate media. Corporate media is locked in on Wall Street and the military-industrial complex, and they have culturated our society into a militaristic society since the Second World War. What can we do at this point? Well, I'd like to think that we could get people to vote for the National Initiative. And let me go back to that in a moment. People will say, well, how could you go around the government and get this enacted into law? Well, let me read to you. We, the people of the United States, and I'll paraphrase, do ordain. What does that mean? That means that we are the creators of the government. We, the people, do ordain. God ordains. The people ordain. Well, if we ordain our government, then does it make any sense that we have to get permission from our government to change the government, as our forebears wanted to do so we could improve our happiness? Of course not. We have the basic right, and the major scholars in the United States who have looked at what we're doing with the 9/11, not 9/11, with the National Initiative, all agree. Harvard, Yale, Auburn, Georgetown, Berkeley, all agree that the people have the right to change, by a legislative process, change the government. Otherwise, you're stuck with having to have a violent revolution. And does that make any sense at all? Not at all. But let me go back to what we hope to accomplish with 9/11. By bringing about the people deciding, not the government, by initiative in Massachusetts, they will vote to create a new investigative commission, and it will be a citizens commission, not a government commission. And that's where the rubber hits the road, because they will not have an investment in the existing storyline that exists. Now, mind you, analyze the importance of what happened. It generated three wars, and the worst one, the war on terror, which is going to go on into infinity, because that's as long as we're going to have terror in our human society. And what does that do? That provides the rational underpinning for the continued appropriation of money for the military-industrial complex and the homeland security industrial complex. That's what that does. What else happened? We have spent over $1 trillion of our treasure when we have people unemployed, when we have cancer not dealt with, when we have all these other problems. Here, and this group of people have brought us into cowering in fear over a terrorist. You have 1,000 times more opportunity to die from cancer, which we don't begin to even spend the serious money on it, dying from cancer, than you would getting hurt by a terrorist. And so that's the state we're in. Is there a chance to break through here? Well, I think so. Because if we can get Massachusetts to enact this initiative, and then we take the same initiative and we go to Colorado, we go to California, we go to Oregon, we go to South Dakota, we go to Alaska, we enact it, and it's the same initiative, similar. And we have in the initiative a joint powers agreement so that they coalesce together. And now the key is, who is going to appoint these new commissioners? Well, it will be the steering committee made up of people from Massachusetts, California, other parts of the nation, who will then invite nominations from the American people as to who should be qualified to serve on this commission. And then we'll vet that, and the selection will be made, and then they will then begin their investigation. And keep in mind, they'll have the power to subpoena, and they'll have the power to put people under oath. Let me tell you how important that is, and how ridiculous the last commission was. When they asked, they didn't subpoena, when they asked George Bush to come and testify, well, he brought Dick Cheney, and they sat next to each other. And the commission, now the commissioners, could not take notes. It was not recorded, and they were not sworn. Does that not lead to some suspicion? All that to say, we need a new commission, and who will bring it about? It's not going to be the government. It's not going to be mainstream media. It is going to be the people, and it will be a citizens commission. Now, what will be the impact? I was just on radio this morning, and one person was saying, well, Senator, if you do this, it's going to create anarchy in the nation, because if they find out that some of our political leaders were involved in criminality that killed 3,000 Americans, and not 3,000, 6,000 people in wars, and 1 million people in Iraq, and God knows what's going on in Afghanistan. So, what will happen? The country will fall apart. And I said, my God, you have no faith in the people, and you have no faith in democracy. The country won't fall apart. What we need is, if truth is the danger to democracy, then we have the ultimate oxymoron. The ultimate oxymoron. There is no way to have democracy until the people have the truth and assert their sovereignty based upon that truth. And what we hope is, by an investigation of 9/11, it will be so destabilizing as the real facts come out that you will see the American people rise up and begin to question authority and begin to assert their own sovereignty as human beings. The task for all of us is very difficult. It's we human beings we imperfect human beings attempting to govern ourselves. But if we can't do it, it cannot be done. We just need the vehicle to do it, and the Massachusetts initiative on 9/11, which is going to be issue number I, in November 6, 2012. And also, as a result of that, people becoming aware, my God, if I can bring about a commission that was a de facto federal commission at the state level, maybe I'm qualified to really make policy decisions in this country. And we are qualified. We're more qualified than our leaders. We just don't know it. Thank you very much.